Thank you and welcome everybody this morning or this afternoon if you're on the East Coast. We're glad to be here and we want to share what we have been working on. But first we want to do a poll from you, sort of a basis. So let's pull up the poll. Number one, did you take touchy-feely? If so, for those who did, to what extent are you still using what you learned? What we see is that those who took it, 60% plus who use it somewhat frequently or all the time. The question is, what is it about the course that has this lasting impact? These are not results you would get in most of the GSB courses, and it's a source of great satisfaction to both Carol and myself. There are three things about the course. One is you learn a series of competencies that allow you to build relationships, to raise difficult issues and resolve them, to let yourself be known, and to get to know other people. Very crucial competencies. Second, in an interesting way, you get validated, because what you find in this course is the more that you let yourself be known, really known, the better other people respond. The more they're attracted to you, the more they would want to follow you and be part of your team. But the third thing is you learn how to learn. That is, in the future, you learn how to build relationships with specific others, and in that process, learn more about the relationship building process and more about yourself. So you get these three benefits, and this is why you have these results from this poll, that even years later, we get reports, we get emails of people who are saying, this saved my job, I worked out a difficult issue with my boss, saved my marriage, it's really helped working with my teenage kids. So it's a wide application. And now we want to talk about what it takes to have an exceptional relationship. Carol, want to work on that?
Yeah. So lovely to be here with all of you. And what David and I did over the last 4 years, well, 4 years it took us to kind of distill all the lessons and then write a book, which was like being pregnant for 3.5 years and then in labor for 6 months. And now we're actually in search of our village to help us raise the baby. So thank you for being here. We landed on this idea of exceptional relationships by culling all the lessons that we observed in touchy-feely. And where we arrived is that relationships exist on a continuum. From at one end, contact with no connection, at the other end, something that we came to call exceptional. And along the way, we get to at least from contact with no connection and dysfunctional to functional and somewhat robust. And there are 6 characteristics that we've extracted from our experience, and they are: first, that you are more fully known. You allow yourself to let the other person see a little bit more of what's behind what many of us usually present as a spun image. The second is that you're willing to more fully let me know you, and those tend to be somewhat reciprocal, which students who took touchy-feely probably remember and have experienced. Number 3 is that we trust that our disclosures won't be used against us, and that we've made them in service of a deeper connection, a more robust relationship. The 4th is that we can be honest with each other. And the 5th is that we deal with conflict productively, and we lean in versus run away from conflict because we're afraid we won't be able to end up in a better place on the other side. And we come to learn that we actually do. And we're committed to each other's growth and learning, which is why we can be honest with each other and lean into conflict. And when you have all 6 of those, you've moved along this continuum, and the extent to which those exist and in totality and in depth is what moves you eventually to exceptional. And they all involve risk. So, your own business, no risk, no reward. And, if I'm vulnerable with you, I don't know whether you're going to judge me or not. If I really am honest with you, will it hurt our relationship? If can we really recover from a conflict and end up in an even better place, or are we better off avoiding it? And there are also costs that David will not talk about.
Yes, with the risk are costs if you don't do it. So Carol talked about the risk of letting yourself be known, be vulnerable. But if you play it close to your chest, you're creating ambiguity, a vacuum. And other people are going to fill that in. And they are going to have their own image of you, and you lose control of that. If you are bothered about somebody's behavior and you're not honest with them, yes, it may make a temporary peace, but it's going to fester, it's going to grow, and the relationship is unlikely to develop. If you raise a contentious issue, yes, it can disrupt it, but if you don't raise it, that, like with lack of honesty, doesn't mean it goes away. It goes underground, and then it's much more dangerous. And again, if I don't share feedback that I have that could help you grow, you're going to sense that. And in all of these, the other cost is if you do this, the other is likely to respond in the same way. That they also won't disclose. They also won't be honest. They also will sweep under the rug the contentious issues, and they may not give you the feedback that develops. So it becomes reciprocal. So there's a cost if you do, and there's a cost if you don't. So students ask us in the course, well, how much should I share? How truthful should I be? And we wish we could give a definitive answer, but the answer we give is take 15% risk. So next slide, please. If we think of disclosure, you have a series of concentric circles. You have the inner circle, which is a zone of comfort. That's what one shares with anything, anybody. So I've been married for over 55 years. I have 2 kids. I have 3 grandkids. No big deal to share that. I like to garden, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have the next 2 circles, the white and the blue circle, which is a zone of learning, which is a little outside my comfort zone, but has the possibility of learning. And then we have the outer circle, which is a zone of danger, which I probably shouldn't share because you don't have all the background to know what that piece of information fits in. And what we say is move outside your comfort zone to the 15%, to that white circle. And if you do that, you're going to be testing whether you can share this. And in most cases, it's going to turn out very well. And if it doesn't, you can back off a little bit. And in doing that, the other person is also likely to share their 15%. You have now shared it, it's worked out well. Now your zone of comfort has increased and you can share another 15% and they can share another 15% and so on. So we say, you don't share everything. That's not a wise thing to do. But if you play it safe, nothing much new is going to happen. So take 15% in the zone of disclosure, in the zone of raising issues, in the zone of raising contentious issues, and see how it works out.
Now, it's not just about how much you share, but it's also about what you share, which David just demonstrated. My computer just very helpfully offered me a software update from Java. Any of you ever had that while you were on a Zoom call? Anyway, I'm now back. So it's not just about what you share. And enter the reason this is called touchy-feely, emphasis on the feely, because it turns out that sharing our feelings is one of the best ways to become known and one of the best ways to create deeper relationships. So let's talk for a moment about why emotions are important. When David said, I've been married, I've got kids, I got grandkids, you learn a little bit about them, but wouldn't it have been more satisfying to hear a little bit about the feelings attached to have been married that long? The feelings attached to being a grandfather of 3 grandkids? So emotions are to thoughts like treble is to bass. First of all, feelings and emotions are what give meaning to facts. If I tell you I went ziplining, well, that's a fact. It's interesting. If I tell you I went ziplining and it was exhilarating, you've learned something else about me. If I tell you I went ziplining and I was terrified, but I went because I didn't want to be left behind and ended up feeling coerced by my family, that tells you something else. By the way, that's a lot closer to the truth. So without that, you've only gotten half the information. I went ziplining. Feelings also indicate the importance of something. They indicate, there's a very big difference between I'm slightly irritated, I'm annoyed, I'm angry, I'm furious. And so that also helps you understand what's going on for me for your benefit, but also in really understanding me better. And they tend to make us more human. So let me share a quick story with you. In 1975, I went to work for the largest industrial automation company in the world. I was the first woman hired into a non-clerical job. And I learned pretty quickly, if I was going to succeed, I was going to have to leave all my feelings in the parking lot. And I got very good at it, and it served me very well. And I kept getting promoted, and I was a hard worker, and I eventually, fast forward 10 years, I'm now running, I was hired as a sales engineer, junior sales engineer. 10 years later, I am now running a $50 million business and a 13 Western state region. And I'm at an offsite with my guys. And yes, they were still guys, although I eventually fixed that. 6 guys and me. And I've got an idea that I think is kind of cool. Crickets when I share it. So I get a little more animated. Come on, this could be cool. Crickets. Then I get really, I guess I was a little tired. I guess my guard was a little bit down. And I was like, come on, you guys, this could be so cool. And and at that point, one of my guys leans in, looks at me and says, Carol, is that water in the corner of your eye? Oh my God, are you going to cry? But then he said, are you human after all? Are you human after all? And that's when I burst out crying. And I said, you don't think I'm effing human? I did use the full expletive, but I don't want to offend anybody on the call. And I said, I don't think there's anything more important for us to talk about than that. Tore up our agenda. And we spent the next 2 days talking about who we were, why we were there, how we could really help each other. And I believe that was the day we became a team, a real team. And I definitely know that was the day I became a leader. And so what I had learned early had served me. If I burst out crying 2 months into the job, I'd have never ended up with it 10 years later running a $50 million region. And if I'd done that with a brand new group that I hadn't been working with for a while, it'd have been dicier. But boy, at that point, the fact that I had become so unwilling to express my emotions had really started to cost me. So let's go to the next slide, please. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about, do you have a relationship in your life that you'd like to deepen? And what could you share about yourself that would let that person significantly know you better? Maybe even some feelings. So take a moment to think about that.
Okay, thank you, Carol. We now want to move on to another topic in which we do have, or tend to have feelings about, and we're often not sure how to handle. If you can remove the slide, please. And that is the issue of pinches. And by pinches, what we mean are those sort of comments, actions that other people take that we feel slightly pinched by. It may be a joke at our expense. It may be that they have cut us off. We're in the middle of making our point. It may be that there's a tone in how they've said it that we feel a little bit put down. It's not a capital crime. It's not a, doesn't feel like a major personal attack. It feels like a pinch. And the question is, what do we do with that? If we raise everyone, we're going to be raising a fair amount, and there's a danger of how we're going to be seen. Oh, you're just too sensitive. Oh, can't you take a joke? Come on, be a team player. However, if we don't raise it, there could also be a cost. It also could grow a little bit. It could distance me from the other person. It could make me feel more guarded. So the question is, when do I raise it? When do I not? And there isn't any certain answer to it, but we want to give you some guidelines. One is, if the sting lingers the next day, it means it hasn't gone away. Most pinches go away. But if it lingers, it may be something to raise. The other measure might be, does that person do it again? And the second time, it doesn't just a little pinch, but it starts to become annoying. And if we don't raise it, it could move from a pinch to a crunch, and then we do have a problem. But there's another wonderful way that Carol developed of how we know it, and that's to change the pronoun. Rather than saying, oh, it's not worth it, rephrase that and say, I'm not worth it, you're not worth it, the relationship isn't worth it. And then the answer may become clearer. Because yes, it may not be worth it, but it might be worth it to raise it. Now, in terms of raising it, we want to talk about, well, now what we want to do, if we have the next slide, please. Is to have you reflect again. Take a minute here. Has there been an incident recently where a friend or coworker, where they said or did something that was a pinch for you and you didn't share it? Think of that time, think of how you felt, and use the change in pronouns of I'm not worth it, they're not worth it, relationship isn't worth it. And do you wish you might have shared it? So reflect on that. And if you wish you had, it's relatively recent, you want to go back to that person and say, I felt a pinch that I want to talk about. Now I want to build on that and look at the question that Carol raised in terms of taking risk around how honest to be in any situation, not just this one, but other situations. How honest to be. Again, we have the 15% rule. You may not share everything, but what could you share that would convey the meaning of the issue that was 15%? That's one way to think about it. The other thing is, if you're raising something that's bothered, you may want to share your intention and a goal. So let's say that, well, Carol, let's say I was interrupted. Let's say Carol interrupts me. Well, as a matter
Never
of fact,
happens, by the way.
she does it all the time, and we work well with it. But I know people where that could be bothersome. So let me pretend it's bothersome, although it isn't. I'm probably going to want to share it, to say, hey, it's really third time you've done it. I'm really bothered. But I may want to share my intention and the goal. And the reason I'm raising this, Carol, is that it's distancing me a bit from it. And that's not what I want to have in our relationship. So I'm raising it because the relationship isn't where I want it to be, and that we have that in common. Also, can I consider whether her behavior, which is bothering me, might be costly to her? Often when somebody does something that bothers us, it is costly to them. So again, I'm making this up. If it turned out that her interrupting me one of the implications was I decided to pay less attention to what she had to say. Well, I lose with that, but she loses also. So I can say, hey, this not only bothers me, but it's costing you a bit, which increases her motivation to change. But also, we say that feedback is the breakfast of champions. That's what we say at the GSB. I'm sure you've heard it there as a student. And what we're talking about is a form of honesty there where we believe you can say almost anything to almost anybody if you stick with your reality. Now, we put the almost in because we're both academics, but if we had a couple glasses of wine, we would probably say you can say anything to anybody if you stick with your reality. But what do we mean by sticking with your reality? Carol, will you expand on that?
Yes, let's look at the next slide, please. For this very wonderful model developed by David many years ago. And anybody who's ever been to the GSB, anybody who's ever taken touchy-feely, and certainly many people who didn't even take it, have heard about the model of the net. So in any interaction between two people, there are actually three realities. Next slide, please. There's this man's reality, meaning his intent, his motives, the reason he does and says things. There's what he does. That's reality number 2. And there's the impact of that on this woman. That's reality number 3. Next slide, please. And there's this metaphorical net that exists between reality number 1 and reality number 2, which is what helps us understand how when we're giving feedback to someone else, we need to stay on our side of the net. In this case, I'm going to give you a very quick example. My husband comes, this is many decades ago, my husband comes home from a long day at the office. He was a big time executive in the Valley. I've been home with an infant and a 2-year-old. And I hear him come home. I come zooming around the corner to where he has sat down and picked up the newspaper and is reading. And I say, oh my God, you won't believe what happened today. I went to that new nursery school, hasn't even opened yet. Oh my God, why are we raising kids in Palo Alto? This is crazy. I don't want to raise, nya, 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 nya. To which he says, mm-hmm. And then I say, you're not listening. Next slide. When I say you're not listening, I am over the net. I'm not in his head. I'm not in his reality. I don't know whether he's listening or not. And now he can say, yeah, I am. You went to that new nursery. He still doesn't look up. You went to that new nursery school. You're all worked up because it's already closed. Now I get a little more agitated and I start to say things like, how can you not care? How can you be so insensitive? Which, by the way, calling my husband insensitive is one of the most insensitive things a person could do because he's one of the most sensitive people on the planet. And by the way, he didn't say, I don't care. I am over the net the minute I start imputing motives and attributing and labeling and telling him what's going on in his reality. Now, is that going to help us move towards a more productive conversation? Probably not. So it's when I learn to stay on my side of the net, and I don't think I have a slide where we've eliminated the net and the arrow, but when I learn to stay on my side of the net, I learn to say things like, honey, when I'm desperate for adult conversation and the only response I get is a grunt and no eye contact, that's reality number 2. Anybody watching the exchange would have said, yeah, that's what happened. I don't feel heard. I don't feel heard is on my side. And when I don't feel heard, I feel distanced. And I feel less capable of being there for you in the way I want to be. All on my side of the net. And what that does, it helps us move towards a problem-solving conversation, because that's the purpose of feedback. Purpose of feedback is for you to understand that you're doing something that's problematic for me and for us to figure out what we're going to do about it. At that point, you know, once I could get his attention, he said, well, Carol, if you want my undivided attention, you're going to have to give me some time to unwind. I was like, oh, geez, never knew that, by the way. Isn't that an interesting thing? Been married, long enough to have had 2 kids. And I said, well, how much time do you need? He's like, I don't know, half an hour. I was like, half an hour? Are you kidding? How about 5 minutes? We settled on 15. But the bottom line is that it wasn't until I could find a way to give him the feedback that would not make him defensive that we could move into that. So now let's go to the next slide, please. Let's give you a moment to think about whether you've got somebody in your life that you'd like to give some constructive feedback to. What is the behavior? Can you identify the behavior? How does it make you feel? Again, that's what's called touchy-feely. That's why the students get a vocabulary of feelings as part of their syllabus. How sad is it that we have to come up with that, because people can't come up with their feelings. And what are your concerns about raising it? Just take a minute to think about that.
Okay, we want to close with talking about some of the traps in the feedback process. To build on what Carol said, think of the sort of feedback you have received at work and with other people. In most cases, it's over the net. At work, we say to somebody, well, the trouble is you don't want to be a team player. I don't know what you want. Or the trouble is you just have the wrong attitude. Attitude is not a behavior. So that's also over the net. You just want to dominate. You just want to build up your empire. That's what causes defensiveness, and also is of low impact, because the other person could say, no, I don't. No, I'm not. And then you're stuck. Remember that if you stick with your reality, it's indisputable. When Carol said to Andy, when only I get as a grunt, I feel dismissed, he can't say, no, you don't, because he would be over her net. So it's indisputable, and that's part of its power. So why do we have so much trouble with feedback? Most of the time, it's because we don't use this model. We don't focus on the behavior. Behavior has to be something you can point to. I can't point to an attitude. I could point to the person leaning back with what appears to me as a smirk on their face and say that behavior makes me feel annoyed, and because this is the conclusion I'm drawing, but it's my story. So we don't focus on behavior. We also don't share all the effect it has. We usually don't share the feelings. That's really very important. But there's other effects. Does it get in the way of my wanting to be open to share with you? Does it distance me from you? In work, does it make me want to not want to go that extra step for you because I don't feel taken or responded to when I make a request of you? Then it makes me less committed to respond to your request. What are all the costs? And as I said, another cost is we don't speak to the other person's interests. This is why we say feedback is a gift, because in most cases, people don't intend to cause problems. People don't get up in the morning and say, today I'm going to be a real asshole. I'm really going to be as difficult as I can be. They don't do it. Remember, the road to hell is lined with good intentions. It's behavior, it's a problem. So again, do we raise it? We may be annoyed, we may be upset, but we're doing it because we want to help the other person and we want to help the relationship. Finally, we have to be careful of the math we use. We sometimes say, well, they really had good intentions, or they're really a nice person, or they really have helped me at other times. So we have a formula which says +5 and -5 does not equal 0. A good reaction to them doesn't cancel out an annoying reaction to their behavior. +5 and -5 equals +5 and -5. So just because we think they're a good person doesn't mean that we're not annoyed at something they have done. And it may be a gift to tell them that because they probably didn't intend it. Well, that's a quick encapsulation of the book. For those of you who have bought it, we hope that you read it carefully and reread it, and that it helps you in building your relationships. So in the remaining time, let's see what the rest
Hang on, David. I was going to have, I was going to include a concluding thought about
Okay.
choices. So if we could lose the slideshow, I just want to take a minute to talk about how one of the most powerful aspects of touchy-feely is the extent to which it created an opportunity for students to test their beliefs and assumptions about what draws us closer, about what makes us better leaders. And to the extent that you can test those mental models, because we developed them very early in our careers, as I did, and they might stop serving us, to the extent we can test those and see which are serving us and which are not, and which new ones we need to adopt and increase our skills. We broaden our choices in terms of how we show up with other people. And that's both empowering and builds stronger relationships. And now we'd like to open it up to Q&A.
Thanks, Carol.
Thank you so much to both of you. If you have questions you'd like to ask in person, please raise your hand. Otherwise, I'm going to start off with some questions that came in via the chat. One being, would you consider microaggressions to be the same as pinches? How do you deal with microaggressions?
So that's really interesting because I had never thought about putting those together. And when I've been on the receiving end of a microaggression, I can only speak from my experience. It has never felt like a pinch. It has felt bigger than that. It's not one of those things that, well, let me put it this way. It has definitely felt like a big pinch, like a pinch worth raising right away. Not one that I immediately think, maybe that's, I don't have to become irritated a little longer. So maybe my instant reaction was, ooh, that doesn't feel like a pinch. I do think that where there's a parallel is that in naming it right away and creating an opportunity to talk about the felt experience as soon as possible, which is what David was really talking about on that spectrum of addressing pinches, is very spot on. And in fact, really a time when I have to say, I'm worth it, I'm not worth it in raising it. I don't know, David, do you have anything you want to add to that?
The thing which I think that's really spot on. The thing I would add is be careful of the word aggression because it implies the other person intended it. And I think a lot of what we experience as a major pinch, and I think it is a major pinch, may have been unintentional. But if we start with the assumption they intended to do it, we're likely to want to slam them rather than trying to raise it in a constructive way. We don't know why they raised it. All we do know is we feel aggressed upon.
And I do think it's important to underscore that by definition, a microaggression is usually something the other person is not aware they've done. And that's why they call it microaggressions. And the language, to David's point, matters. And so some people are very familiar with the concept and know that there's a difference between micro and macro aggressions. And the word aggression is still in there. So I do think that how you approach the conversation matters a lot, and the language you use matters a lot.
Do you find any issues in using your models across different races or ethnicities?
Yeah, I think that this model makes a difference. when we raise something, we also need to be aware of how is it likely to feel to the other person. And this is in a sense where we need to have some sensitivity. It may be that if this is a person of color, if this is a woman, I'm going to raise it in a slightly different way than if it's a white male who is used to the sort of jockeying, put down world that they live in. So it's not just the words I use, but also that I have to realize that a message that I make that would have a force of 1 to another white male may have a force of 2 or 3 to somebody who has felt on low power positions. I also think that this really speaks to how we can have conversations. My trainer at the gym is Black, and Rick and I have wonderful racial conversations. And I can raise it because I'm curious. I want to know his world, and he wants to know mine. And I think if we raise things with a curiosity because we want to know, we can say a lot more because we are showing we are interested in that person. We don't see them like an object. And I think too often we see other people as objects, and that's not very conducive to them wanting to self-disclose or to build a relationship.
What do you do when you share the impact of someone's behavior on you in the hopes that the behavior might change, but the person may be unwilling to change or unable to change it? So do you keep sharing the feedback? Do you give up or just accept it?
Well, you caught yourself there a little bit because there's a difference between can't and choose not to. So when you're providing feedback on behavior, we all have a choice. I can choose to change my behavior. It might be hard, but I can choose to. So when it comes to behaviorally specific feedback, which is why David emphasizes that so much, it's important to remember that you don't have to accept I can't, but you might have to accept I choose not to. And so, for example, if you give me feedback that I interrupted a lot, I spoke a lot, I didn't make space for other people to speak up. As a result, you didn't see as many people speaking up as you would have liked. That's a behavior. If you ask me to be less extroverted and bubbly and enthusiastic, that I can't do. That's part of my personality, but I sure can change my behavior. And so that's the first thing to remember. Ask yourself whether you've been behaviorally specific. The other thing is to, as David said earlier, to speak to their interests. And the third is to get curious. I wonder what it is that you've heard me say. And in terms of the impact on me, and my fear is on others, my fear for you is on others. Because, I'm invested in you and your development, or I'm invested in you in our relationship. Do you have something you want to add, David?
Yeah, I think those are great. The other thing is, remember, one piece of feedback won't change 30 years of behavior.
Yeah.
So we say be persistent. The other thing to think about is, and this is building on what Carol said, is you may need to escalate a little bit. You may need to say, this is how it's bothering me. It's getting in the way of the relationship. See how that lands. You may want to say it's hurting you. It may say, if they just continue, you may want to say, I'm really trying to be helpful. This doesn't seem to be working. It's increasingly annoying. And to build on what Carol said about asking curiosity is, if they are hurting themselves, I wonder why. People rarely go around and say, I'm going to hurt myself today. And can I ask out of curiosity, not out of an accusation? And the final point I would make is that feedback says as much about the giver as about the receiver. So if you're bothered about their behavior, what is it about you that is bothered. That's a point of learning. Sometimes realizing that I get bothered a little less. Sometimes sharing that helps the other person open up more. So as we say, feedback starts a conversation. There's all these ways in which you can go.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm going to try to combine two questions here because we're running close on time. So when you are on a team that does not want to talk about feelings or being open and transparent, how do you manage that? And I think a side question to that is when you're on a team that is made up of extroverts and introverts, where that 15% may vary very differently between people, how do you handle that?
I'll take the first one, the second one, and David, you take the first one. So on the second one, I think it's really important to remember that everybody's 15% might look different than our own. And that when we talk about the 15%, we normally are talking about negotiating what the 15% is going to, my 15% with David is going to look very different than my 15% with a client, than my 15% with my, with somebody I've just met. So it's interpersonal dynamics. And just because I can go this far with one person doesn't mean that's actually the right thing to do with someone else. So the individuality of the relationships matters. And I think that's part of what happened, that part of what's challenging about doing it in a team, which again might relate to the introvert and extrovert thing, and being sensitive to that. I don't know. I've never thought about this, David. I'd love to know your thoughts, which is there a group dynamic of going 15% beyond our collective comfort zone? Probably don't have time to just totally unpack that, but it's a fascinating question.
It is good. I have no answer to that. Let me pick up the first part very quickly. One is, remember that when we say we don't want to talk about feelings, managers talk about feelings all the time. They say, I'm really annoyed this report was late. I'm really excited about this new client. I'm really worried that our not responding to what the customer wants is going to hurt us. I'm really have been losing sleep and disturbed that this project isn't moving as fast as it is. So we use feelings all the time. The other thing, you can do 15% beyond what is normal for the group. And maybe that makes the group a little more comfortable with it. And the third point I'd make is, if you're aware of feelings, you can often sense when somebody else has a feeling that they haven't stated or fully stated. And you can say, hey, it sounds like that really pisses you off. Well, you're legitimizing their show and saying, yeah, it really pisses me off. Or it sounds like you're worried about this. Or it sounds like this is really important to you. Am I hearing that right? And what you're doing is you're legitimizing a full expression of emotions in this team.
Thank you both. I know that we only had you until 9:50. I'm going to go over one extra minute and ask you very, very quickly, for those who didn't get a chance to take touchy-feely or have completely forgotten what they've learned, other than the book, how might they take a similar type of class or get that content?
Well, we now teach an executive program, not cheap, so have your company send you, which is a 5-day, 6-day program in which it's residential and it's compacted. And we both have taught, in fact, both of us developed it, which is a substitute for that. And Carol is now doing a program for Silicon Valley executives. Carol, describe that. That's very good.
So it's called Leaders in Tech, leadersintech.org. And it's a 4-day intensive, similar to the executive program at Stanford, and priced considerably lower, and shorter, but it's definitely an immersive experience that has enough to give people traction on learning this, and in fact, uses the lessons from the book as well as the lessons from Touchy-Feely and the pedagogy of T Group, which is the basis of the Touchy-Feely experience as well.
And also what we would say is that being part of the business school, we have to be in marketing, buy the book, because each chapter has suggestions for how you can apply it. So you can build your own interpersonal learning experience with your friends and families and colleagues by using some of the suggestions in the book.
And in fact, go to our book website, connectandrelate.com, and there you will find downloadable free assessment that you can use to see how are you on your interpersonal skills. Give it to people in your life, see how the way they see you compares to the way you see you. You can download a free create your own learning group using the book with a guide on how to do that. So our intention here is just to arm many, many more leaders in the world with these skills and competencies. We think we'd have a different world. You know, the GSB motto, change lives, change organizations, change the world.